So, I just don't think things are getting any better from my point of view at all. Um, but let's hear about what you do, and who you are, and a bit about what's happened to your experiences. I want to get your views, your opinions. Um, I mean, we've obviously spoke quite a bit in the past about why we do what we do, but it's just for everybody listening.
Mm.
So if you just want to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks very much, Debs. So I'm Natalie. I think I might be a world record holder because I've been through three Hague Convention cases. I'm talking about the Hague Convention on International Parental Child Abduction. So sort of that's where my story began. It began with what I believe we should be calling the kidnap of my children. And that's one of the reasons why I think that the Hague Convention is a problem, because it takes the criminal act of child kidnap out of the criminal courts and puts it into the family courts or the civil courts, usually. I don't know if that's true for all countries, but certainly is in the UK and in Europe and America, I
Ju-
think.
just
Yeah.
explain a bit more about the Hague Convention,
Mm.
Nat.
Yeah. So basically, there's an organisation called the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and it started up, I think, more than 100 years ago, as an attempt to try to find international agreement. And I think it was, the history is more about, I think it might actually have its roots in sort of preventing war, but also sort of preventing conflict in commercial contracts. And I think that this is one of the reasons why the Hague Convention is a little bit problematic, because you find that there are Hague Conventions relating to things like recognition of patents and notarized documents, you know, which are used in banking and things like that, and commercial contracts, and then families. And it's like, why are these things lumped together? And I think that there might be more than one answer to that question. And I think one of them is the sort of traditional view of, um, sort of marriage breakup and dissolution as, a process of division of assets. But unfortunately, I think what has happened is that children have started to be viewed as an asset, or even as a commodity. I think it's not unreasonable to say that, and that is what I have witnessed as a mother, my children being treated as commodities with no rights. So, yeah, there are several Hague Conventions. A lot of the mums who become involved in child abduction cases might not realise that the Hague Convention on International Parental Child Abduction is not the only one. There's, for example, a Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption, which is definitely also problematic. Then there's one on international child protection, which I just have come off a research interview with somebody who's looking into also sort of cross-border family cases. And I told her about one of my friends, European Commission official Roly Post, who was a whistleblower, and she told me that I think it was an American diplomat said to her that there is no really such thing as International Convention on Child Protection. It's consumer protection. So what we're talking about is huge profit-making lobbies, the children's social care industry, because children's homes, foster agencies and adoption agencies can be profit-making. They don't necessarily have to be profit-making companies, but even where they are like NGOs and charities, at the end of the day, they're supporting a kind of industry where people are making money. And when it comes to child abduction cases, I believe, that the Hague Convention on International Parental Child Abduction is being used as the long arm of the family court industry. So when a mother, for example, is forced to go into hiding in another country or to seek protection in another country because she has not been able to get the family courts to protect the rights of herself and her children, then the Hague Convention is basically used as a sort of international policing mechanism to go and grab them by the scruff of their necks and drag them right back where the courts and where the father want them. Which sometimes, often usually involves, the mother and or children being subjected to abuse. So that's the Hague Convention. Basically, there is a sort of narrative that it was brought into being because of controlling men who would take children, back to countries, like, I don't know, Pakistan or whatever, and, the mother would never see them again. But that's not how it's playing out. It's being used against mothers who are fleeing because the police and the courts will not protect them in the countries that they're living in. And also in cases like my original case, where the child is actually taken by the father without provocation, as a sort of what's been described in the UK courts as the ultimate controlling act. It decriminalises those cases. So in all of those instances, it looks like it's being used to facilitate international child trafficking. So, or even national. So if a mother is trying to protect her children being given to an abuser, I would say, that is a form of child trafficking, which is happening in the family courts. A child clearly should not be given to an abusive parent. If that's happening, and if there's money changing hands at any point in that system, that's a kind of child trafficking. And if a father is able to take the child abroad and the civil courts don't stop him from doing that, and they don't, and the fact that this piece of law exists means that the law enforcement agencies will not get involved. It means that that law is facilitating international child trafficking. And my involvement with Roly Post, whose area of expertise is more in adoption and child protection, she considers certainly, that the Hague laws in those areas are facilitating the trafficking of children across borders.
What do you think needs to be done? Where do you start with it all?
That's a
my view on it now is, as you know, I think that these courts need opening up. It's as simple as that. They need opening up. We've got journalists going in, but I do believe that cases are being cherry-picked. And ultimately, I think that's my stance on it. They need opening up and they need regulating properly so that they can be under scrutiny. But that's my take on it. What's yours?
I think there's a few things here. One of them is the Hague Convention. The second thing is the family courts, and the third thing is criminal law. So I think that
they're not joined up, are they? They're not joined up. None of it's joined up.
Yeah, I think that the family courts are driving child abductions. Mothers are being forced to flee because the family courts will not protect them, because the family courts, where there are allegations of abuse, instead of protecting the child and the mother, they are actually exacerbating the conflict. They're dragging the case out over years to the point where the mother has absolutely no option in order to protect her children or protect her own state of health and well-being. She has got to run. It is a legitimate attempt to reach safety. So if we were to solve the family courts, I believe that we would solve a lot of the Hague Convention cases, you know, to start off with. Sort of going, sort of, we mentioned policing.
Yeah, and that is the point. That is the port of call, isn't it? And that for me is where if they were doing their jobs properly and they were implementing the laws that are in place, then I want to say that the majority of cases would not even end up in the family court arena. And that is it. It's about prevention, isn't it? I think personally, that's my view on it. If we can prevent any of it, because it has a massive, massive impact emotionally, financially, physically. You know, it needs addressing, because I see on the ground is that the police are not policing, and ultimately there's no point in having laws in place, because it's all back to front and they're not being adhered to. And it's same as then we roll into social care again. If social care were adhering to the laws as well, and I don't believe that the majority of social workers understand domestic abuse. It's okay that professionals are saying they are trained in it. I don't believe that they're trained in it to the level that they need to be trained in it, because it's so complex. And ultimately these professionals are making decisions on families' lives that they're not trained to do properly, and that's the thing for me. I think that there needs to be an independent advisory board that the government need to listen to, that have lived experience, that's in a peaceful way where voices can be heard properly, because everybody's case is so different and so unique and so complex that the only way I think that to get to the root of all this is by unpicking it all and starting from scratch. Because I do believe that the policies, procedures and the laws have been put in place by people that have no idea the reality of how it ends up in that family court arena anyway.
Yeah, I think it's worse than that, if I'm honest with you. I think that they're perfectly aware of what the reality is, but the policy is based on ideology, which says, you know, that the family unit, you know, is something that, you know, is desirable, you know, from the point of view, let's say, of, you know, right wing, you know, conservative, you know, thinking. Actually, one of the MPs who has been quite instrumental in sort of putting into place the policies as they are today, that's Ian Duncan Smith, who's recently just got back in his seat in Chingford and Woodford Green, because Labour decided to deselect their candidate, who's very good, and that's Faisal. I always forget how to pronounce her name, but I really respect her hugely. I think it's, let me just check, because I've been reading her book. Faisal Shaheen, I think it is. I'm really sorry, I'm just looking on Kindle to see.
I'm hoping, I'm praying, and I think that we're going to see a big shift with this new government.
Yes, Dr. Faisal Shaheen, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a positive, because for me, I don't think it could get much worse. Like I said, I can't really pinpoint. I can't pinpoint one service or organisation, because the entire thing's failing at the moment. And
yeah,
I really do think that we are going to see a big shift in all of this. I'm hoping and praying that we are anyway.
You know what? My concern is that there quite a lot of MPs who are concerned about what's happening in the family court, and there have been for years. In 2019, there was a group of 120 MPs who asked for an inquiry, and Theresa May was Prime Minister at the time, and she said no. But my concern is that those MPs are not really quite understanding what the problem actually is. And I think that you're right. I think that the parents who've actually been through it, and children as well, children who have now grown up. Dr. Faiza Shaheen, she went through it as a child. So her mother was in the family court. So she's seen it through the perspective of a child who is now an adult. Now, in Duncan Smith, he is a Conservative, and he's been on the record, it's in the newspapers saying we can't have all these single men rattling around the streets because they would create a menace. They're violent, so they should be at home, inside the family, where presumably the child and the mother would absorb their violence, so it doesn't spill out onto the streets. I don't think that's an acceptable way of approaching it, and I think that
I think it's a bizarre way of approaching it, to be honest.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, when it comes to policing, has there been, what is driving the failure of policing? Is it that kind of ideology which has become embedded sort of in the culture of policing? And we know that we've got huge problems with toxic cultures in policing. We know that we've also got problems with corruption in policing as well. But I think that there are other things like, one of them is, I think a lot of police forces have had a lot of problems with people leaving, unable to cope, because of the culture.
And that's usually the good ones. It's the good ones that are either being forced out or they're leaving because they know that what's happening is just not right.
Yeah. And then you've got new people coming in. It takes time to train police officers, and for them to go stuff like training and handling domestic abuse cases. The question is, when does that come in their training? How long have they been on the beat until they've had that training? What is the nature of that training? I've been through it myself, and it's been laughable, frankly.
Same. Yeah. And you get an I-risk, your I-risk, but 3 days later you've not spoke to a officer. Sometimes we're dealing with cases where they don't see an officer at all, and very much so now. I think that women have just lost total faith. They don't even bother reporting anymore. They've just, what's point? And that is the low morale now. And going back to what you said about children that have gone through these experiences, that have grown up, they have grown up believing that they have no faith or trust in the laws, in any services, because they've grown, especially my children, they have got absolutely no faith whatsoever in policing, in the law, in social care, and these children are all growing up, and it's as though there just don't seem to be any law and order in this country anymore. It's all back to front.
No.
We've got people that are getting sent to prison for breaching court orders, for speaking out, or not paying your TV licence. We've got people that are actually committing serious crimes, rape, assaults, and they're walking out freely to continue to do it again. And I just think, what's going on? The courts are putting orders in place that are not fit for purpose. They may as well not exist. Because you've got police that don't do anything about them if they're breached.
You know what? I think you've touched on a couple of things there. One of the things I wanted to say is I think we need to look at policing targets because very often behaviours in organisations are driven by the targets that are set. And I don't know a huge amount about this, but if police are being judged on certain targets, their behaviours are going to be sort of modelled by, needing to reach those targets. And the question is, where are these crimes, in those targets? Are they excluded because they're too difficult to deal with? And they'll mess up the figures. So maybe that's why the police are not even taking action.
But I think that's the problem with the entire system, because it's all about ticking boxes.
Yeah.
And like I've said before, it's all lip service, because they are not doing what they say they're doing. And that goes from start to finish. We can all tick a box, but actually evidencing that, what they've done is real, we're not seeing any of that by any means. And basically they only tick the boxes to give back to the government so that they get the funding. That's how it rolls. But we can all tick a box. There seems to be just no duty of care anywhere anymore. That sentence is just like non-existent. Nobody cares. People have lost faith. They've lost... A lot of people have lost everything. We've got women and children queuing up for food. What the hell? What the hell is going on?
You know what? This is one of the reasons why I stood as an MP, because I think that there are some really, really big picture problems here. I talked about targets, and another thing I think is funding and resourcing. So I sort of started to notice similar patterns in other areas of, other types of crime. So a couple of friends of mine, both who are very vulnerable people, who they're actually people with disabilities who had been impacted by crimes. One of them was like criminal damage to their property, and the other one was fraud. It was a contractor who came and did some services, but it was actually a sort of like fraudulent company. In both instances, they were told the police could do nothing about it, and in the fraud case, the police, sort of refused to investigate the company. Now, my friend had contact details for that company. She knew what company it was, but the police said it's a civil matter. Have you heard that before?
Yes.
Where the police say it's a civil... Exactly.
Yes.
This is what domestic abuse victims hear all the time.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening is the government has been unwilling to properly resource, the criminal justice system. And so they're basically saying to people, you go and get yourself a lawyer. And in this civil justice system, you've got lawyers making money. So then you're forced to be able to have to pay, in order to, get justice for yourself.
But what happens when you haven't got the finances?
Yeah, you can't do anything.
You're screwed, aren't you? That's the thing.
That's exactly right, yeah.
It's just so unfair what is happening, and not many people have got thousands and thousands of pounds, have they not, to keep throwing at legal proceedings. They just cannot fund it. We've supported women that have had to sell the cars, they've had to sell the homes. It's like they are basically pushed into a corner, and then they wonder why it has an impact on their mental health by the time they get in front of a judge.
Yeah, this is it. I mean, you can't really just have access to justice for people who can afford it. It's, it's all wrong. And it just sort of feels as well, like I've spoken to people inside the criminal justice system who work very closely with it, who have said, that such a tiny proportion of fraud, is getting processed as a crime. Yeah. And that's across, all different kinds, it's like white collar crime, sort of embezzlement and stuff. It sort of feels like the way that the criminal justice system is set up at the moment is, profiting people who are actually committing crimes which are causing huge, huge costs to society, but they're massively enriching themselves and in some cases taking that money abroad. So it just sort of feels a little bit like, if the government wants to get to grips with stuff, they need to start tackling some of these, pretty high-profile fraud cases and getting the money, recovering the assets which can be put back into the public services. So, for example, we can properly fund the police system so that the
Yeah.
police have got the resources to tackle crime. And I think
Yeah.
if we were to start right there, then we could start to actually see improvements in frontline policing.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, because everything is so underfunded. You know, the bobbies on the beat, the social workers, the ones that are actually on the ground, they're the ones that are getting all stick for the failings. But ultimately, I feel, and don't get me wrong, there is some horrendous officers and social workers, you know, where power's gone to their head or whatever. But there's also some very good ones, and their hands are tied. They can see that it's wrong, but ultimately their hands are tied as well, and they're the ones that are getting all the stick for not being able to do the jobs as they want to, because they're not funded or supported properly. And that's really sad, because then they're forced into giving up that profession that they've wanted to go into to make changes. And I get it, because they are getting all the stick. I mean, I feel absolutely soul destroyed when we can't get the support in place for women when they are so desperate. And obviously I can have a more holistic approach to it, and I don't tend to get as much stick, because they see it, they understand that it upsets me just as much as anybody, because I've been where they are, and I've been failed like you have, and it is soul destroying when you can't get the support. And like you said, it all boils down to funding. There needs to be more funding in place in social care system, in policing, and I would guarantee if there was more training, in-depth training, that was delivered by people with lived experience that has lived through that system, I guarantee that a lot of cases would not even end up in family courts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yesterday I was in touch with a gentleman who's been helping people who are mainly victims of the sort of public family law side of things, so care proceedings and stuff like that. It was just a very sort of few words that I, exchanged with him. He said, if there's one thing that you need to campaign to change, it is that there needs to be a criminal standard of proof, before, child proceedings are able to, the child protection proceedings are able to sort of have a child taken from the family. And I think, the same thing, with the family courts. I think that if there has been, sort of this evidence, of abuse or neglect, that meets the criminal threshold, and this is about a sort of family separation issue and, custody of children, that's not a family court case. Those children need to be, and the mother needs to be, it can be the father as well. Wherever there is evidence, nobody deserves to be a victim of miscarriage of justice where evidence is ignored and the law is ignored. So, if you've got evidence, if you've got the law, you can see something's going wrong, you see that somebody needs protection, somebody who's vulnerable, especially children, you need to take action immediately. And in my own situation, sort of following, the kidnap of my children, I went to social services foolishly, and this was not in this country, thinking I could ask for help. And I was told, "Oh, madam, you're in a very complicated situation. This is going to take years." That shouldn't happen. It should be instantaneous, that, criminal behaviour is punished by, revocation of your rights, immediately. those vulnerable, children need to be protected. You don't need to go through years and years of family court, in order to do that. It shouldn't even enter that, it should, it can be sort of pretty much rubber stamped. And I just wonder, if we were to sort of get all of these cases that are causing this massive backlog, in the family courts out of those courts, could those, resources in the, court system be reassigned to dealing, with criminal cases?
I it's like, I think that there's a certain case at the moment where, the child he's older, he's a teenager, he's got capacity to make his own mind up, 100%. And it's almost as though, no, we need assessments, no, we need a 4-day hearing. Why?
Money. It's money.
Yeah. This child has absolutely had enough. And when I say questioned, I mean interrogated by psychologists, by CAFCASS, by Guardian. And I get it, because I had it with my youngest, and he was crying, "Mummy, why can't they just listen to me? Why? I've told them. Why do they keep asking me the same things over and over and over again?" And he was diagnosed with child complex development trauma. And do you think that helped in any way? Re-triggering him over and over and over, to the point where a social worker actually said to him, "Oh, your daddy must love you so much. We've been to visit, and there's pictures of you in where he lives." Now, is that not emotional blackmail of a child? You know what I mean? Let's not forget what this child has previously witnessed. And he has been, and they made the situation so much worse. And I understand that they have to, do their assessments. I get that. I totally get that. But if they want to talk about safeguarding, how is that safeguarding when they have caused so much emotional damage? They was going into school and taking my child out of lessons without even telling me, and then he would come home, he would be upset, he would be crying, "Mummy, please tell them to leave me alone." And of course, a child that's sat in a classroom, been taken out, and he's got additional needs as well, other children are like, "Oh, Mummy, Joel's had a social worker today come out of school." And I don't just mean once or twice, I'm talking a significant amount of times. And that was with no support worker, and he needs one-to-one support in school. But the social worker took it upon herself to sit and speak to my son on her own, and didn't even sign in or out of school.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Debs, I feel, that these systems are abusing our children. Oops. Sorry, I wasn't sure if we were still online. I feel that absolutely furious about the amount of harm that has been inflicted on my children by this. My son said to me, "Mum, they've stolen half of my childhood," and that was 3 years ago. And if there's one way to teach a child, not, like you said, not to have any faith in adults, in systems, in authority, it is to listen to everything they've told them again and again and again, and then ignore it, which is what happened in my case, and so many cases, that we come across. I mean, honestly, in my case, I never ever understood why on earth social services needed to be involved anyway. We have a judge, we have evidence. make a ruling based on the evidence. Look at the law. What does the law say? Make a ruling. What do you need a social worker for? You know, social workers are supposed to be there to support vulnerable families. They're not doing that. They're spending resources on you know, these, you know, meddling in family court cases where, quite frankly, they're not needed. CAFCASS are doing more harm than good. And as for the experts, you know, they are generally of a quality that is absolutely appalling. I mean, I think most of those are actually fraud cases because, you know, the kinds of assessments that they're doing they're fraudulent. You know, in my case, I've been through an assessment in the UK and in Croatia. You know, if you make an assessment without, you know, write a report without actually conducting a proper psychiatric assessment, and you're a medical doctor qualified and registered as a psychiatrist, and you've not conducted a proper assessment, that is a fraudulent report. You know, so, but no wonder we're not able to prosecute these for fraud if, you know, the criminal justice system is not prosecuting fraud cases at all, practically. Yeah. In Croatia, I can't tell you how unprofessional, you know, those expert witnesses were. It's an absolute disgrace, you know, and, you know, if that's the level that things are at, I'm really sorry. We don't need you. And I just don't think that throwing more kinds of experts into the mix is going to fix this. I think, you know, if you have got judges who are looking at the evidence, you know, seeing this child, you know, this is an abusive, you know, person, this is what's happened, you know, this, you know, actually meets the criminal threshold, you know, and they're making judgments which put the child with the abuser.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is not a safe forum, you know, to be hearing these cases. I think that the family jurisdiction just seems to be so fundamentally flawed. I think it's beyond repair. I saw just this morning there's a woman in Australia who we know about each other, and she campaigns a lot as a mother who's been through the family courts as well. And she was pointing out an academic study on the way that child sexual abuse cases are handled in Australia. And the answer is badly, you know, in 2 out of 3 cases, the child ends up having more contact with the person who's abusing them. And in, I think it's about 17% of cases, the child ends up going to live with the abuser. Now, I've heard, you know, sort of lawyers in the UK saying that in the child sexual abuse cases that they've seen, they know that the mother is saying to be goodbye to that child in almost 100% of cases. Because as soon as the child sexual abuse is raised, then the parental alienation allegations come in, and they flip the script, and it's all about blaming, you know, the other parent.
I wanted to ask you that. Where do you stand on the parental alienation?
You know, I sort of don't. I mean, I have lost my children. The way that I lost custody of my children was because I was accused not of parental alienation, because, yeah, you know, my children have a good relationship with their father. You know, nobody could accuse me of having alienated them from him, but they said I might alienate the children from the Croatian side of their family because I was making complaints about the way the case was handled in Croatia. And so I lost, you know, they were using that same, you know, sort of narrative and, you know, tool of alienation. I sort of feel that I don't think we should get bogged down in the parental alienation discussion. I think we should certainly have an urgent inquiry into all cases where a mother has lost her children because she's been accused of parental alienation, or indeed into all cases, you know, where there are allegations of miscarriage of justice. But I think that the family law concept that we have in the UK, which is an import of the model that we have in the United States, where a mother has got to prove that she's a victim of domestic abuse in order to be able to maintain custody of her children, is just fundamentally flawed from the outset, because then how is a mother going to keep her children with her? She's got to provide evidence of, the father being abusive. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, when it comes to family court, he's going to be anyway. But it sort of sets up that conflict. And there are parents who've said, they've gone into, their child custody case not being particularly, hostile to each other, but by the end of it, they certainly are, because the system goads you into it. It forces the mother into having to prove, her victimhood as that's the thing that her being able to continue being a mother to her children hangs on. Yeah. And that's where the parental alienation thing comes in, because it's a counter allegation. I think we should just cut this out completely. And I just sort of think the family law jurisdiction, it just seems to be so flawed. It's an evidence-free zone. It doesn't appear to refer to the law very much. It doesn't use UK domestic abuse legislation. I think there needs to be a thorough sort of human rights assessment. Yeah. Is it constitutional even? I don't think it is. And what this American mother said is would you try to reform a concentration camp? I've said that before as well. I think it's that bad. I mean, there are some people who say, it's not all about... I don't hear about these good cases. I don't speak to anybody ever.
No, me either.
Who said they had a good experience. Yeah.
No. And no. I've yet to meet somebody that has.
And guess what? There's no data collection.
It won't end up there. It won't end up there in first place. But it's the amount of cases that, what I'm saying is, that probably shouldn't end up there and end up there for as long, years and years of your life absorbed and consumed by them court hearings, by, professionals. And it's your entire life is scrutinised, unpicked, criticised, even your life moving forward. So the perpetrator gets to know about your medical conditions, about your financial status, basically everything. How can you move on? How can you say you've survived that system when that system enables you to still be a victim? And we're not talking a few months down the line, are we not?
And back and back, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how yeah. And I think there's another thing as well we've got to look at, and that is the amount of white-collar crime going on in the family jurisdiction as well. This back in January, I had that family court unconference, and one of the speakers was a woman who, luckily for her, didn't go through child custody proceedings, but she did go through financial proceedings. And what she laid out in that talk, which you can find on the Family Court Crisis YouTube channel, it is white-collar crime. It is family law firms mis-selling high-interest debt and mortgages, to vulnerable, litigants in family law cases. And, just that on its own is huge. I mean, she said, as soon as you step into a family court, dispute and engage a lawyer, you've already said goodbye to at least a third of your assets. And in the cases that I've did a survey a couple of years ago, most people end up losing their jobs due to ill health and stress. A lot of people end up losing their homes. I think if you lose a third of your assets, you're lucky. So I mean, there's abuse of legal aid going on by certain, family lawyers. We know that. I don't think that reinstating legal aid is the answer. My personal view is that family law needs to be excised from the whole system, and we need to completely rethink how we approach relationship breakdown and, the aftermath of it. It's quite a big topic. I think that the only winners at the moment are the law firms. I believe, when you look at the rates that family lawyers are charging, I believe that it's basically a cash cow for family lawyers, at the expense, of families and children. I mean, those assets, they should have gone into, building a future for those children.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another thing what everybody seems to forget, isn't it? Those finances, that house, that home, ultimately, is that child's.
Yeah.
And we've lost all that. What about the child? The children's voices are not being heard. Still, they're not being heard, and I think it's so complex that they don't know how to tackle it, and that's why they keep avoiding, because we're in 2024 and things are not getting any better. In fact, they're getting worse. And I really do believe they don't know how to tackle it.
That's why I think the simplest way is shut it down, because it is racketeering. It's asset stripping families, and it is resulting in the trafficking of children. Like I've said, you can't call it anything different if a child is going from a safe and protective, loving, usually mother. It can be the father. I do know cases where it's been the mother who's been very abusive, and a father who is legitimately trying to protect the children, or who, wants to, have access to the children, but has been really badly treated by the family law system as well. I think that, nobody is winning from this current situation. It is all about profit, and it's got to stop. I think that, if it's so difficult to fix, shut it down and start again. Literally, I think we need an urgent inquiry into what has happened. There are families who need miscarriages of justice correcting right now.
100%. I'll tell you where I can't get my head around that. Cases where we've got a child in the mother's care with no safeguarding concerns, and we've got two other children in a different borough where they've been removed, and she ultimately can't get them children back. I don't get it. It's like with Jade's case, Jade, don't you?
Yeah.
It's like she has got a child in her care. She's got 3 stepchildren that she looks after, yet she can't have overnight stays with her eldest son that's biologically hers, and that just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And it all depends on, and this is all on the say-so of the ex, of the abusive ex. And, it's, I can't get my head around that, because that for me is a system that is enabling abuse.
Yes.
They're enabling that abuse to continue. Why can't that child spend the amount of time that he deserves with his siblings? Because let's not forget, these children have a right to know their siblings, and this seems to be totally forgot about. These children have a human right to have a relationship with their other siblings.
Yeah,
and that's not being adhered to either.
I mean, it's the same with my case as well. How can it be that my ex kidnapped the children? I mean, there's documented abuse. The children are with him full time. I've had the areas that they need me most in, sort of stripped from my parental rights. That's education and healthcare, because he's neglected them and actually acted against them in both those areas. And so social services recommended that those areas be taken away from me, because then I can't continue to interfere with that. And they've been trapped in Croatia for.
So you've got
8 years.
So you've got absolutely no right to raise concerns about your children's education, about their health.
But to be honest, I actually, it doesn't really make very much difference, because even when I did raise concerns, it was absolutely a waste of time, because social services were criminal, actually, and the school wasn't much better. The school covered up my children coming in and crying on a daily basis and saying that they were unhappy with the way they were living. They didn't report that to the court. The teacher lied, and the children reported the teacher to me, you know, that she was behaving abusively towards them on numerous occasions, including physical, you know, corporate punishment. The school's inspector actually found, you know, gave her, you know, sort of measures, you know, to improve her, you know, performance. But then the school covered it up. And this is something that many parents will find. So when you're sort of faced with, you know, sort of this sort of multiple agency cover up, you know, of these crimes, you know, of trafficking of children, it doesn't really help you very much if you have the right to raise a complaint.
But yet you've still got parental responsibility. So again, by law, you have parental responsibility.
Yeah, but that doesn't help me. If the courts are so corrupt, you know, the reason why I lost custody of my children was because 6 people at the final hearing were under investigation by the Office for Anti-Corruption and Organised Crime at the time, and the judge found in their favour and went against the children's wishes and the evidence and the law. So what kind? I mean, you know, that's why I've given up. You know, I said I absolutely. You know, it's a waste of time. You know, I'm not going to engage with this anymore. I think the only thing we can do is break this system down. It's illegal.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We could go on all day about it, couldn't we? That we usually do, but yeah, I'm gonna love you and leave you. But I'm sure we'll chat again soon. You take care.
Thank you.
And just keep doing what you're doing now. We all just need to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay, Debs, you take care as well. You keep doing your wonderful work with women as well. Yeah. Much love to you.
You too.
Okay.
Speak
Cheers.
soon. Bye.
Bye.